Hello everybody, welcome to Conservation Conversation. This is the show where I bring you extra bits of chats with all the best conservationists and ecologists and scientists that we can find. Money for old rope, you might say. This week we're joined by Dr. Henry Birt, who's a research associate at the University of Manchester, and his whole thing is soil. Anyone who saw the first one will know that Henry is a little bit of a legend. His research profile is linked in the description below, but if you're a bit thick like me, we also recommend a couple of books that you can check out. Anyway, let's go over to me and Henry now in the woods, where I'm trying to convince him that I'm clever by telling him about a podcast I listen to. I was listening to a podcast, Stuff You Should Know, and they did an episode on charismatic megafauna. Right. Have you heard of that phrase?
I've heard of megafauna, maybe not charismatic ones.
So, charismatic megafauna are WWF,
right.
World Wildlife Foundation.
Yeah.
They use a panda.
Right.
And you'll have a lot of charities based on, in this country, donkeys, elephants, giraffes, rhinos.
Right.
These are the animals that get a lot of attention when it comes to conservation because they're very charismatic.
Exactly.
But in reality, conservation has as much to do with microbes and insects and plant life and tiny little things and 500 species of fungi in a pea-sized amount of dirt, right?
Yeah. Timber!
Everyone all right? Was that in shot? We'll dynamically risk assess as we go along. Is that all right with you?
Yeah, that's okay. Phife isn't too happy.
The dogs weren't any out, were they? They just sat there. Well, that was weird. So yeah, charismatic megafauna are the ones that get all of the attention, and that's great because it can draw people in if they find giraffes and rhinos really cute and interesting.
Yeah.
But it does mean that 99.9% of all species on Earth are overlooked.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's a good point that they deserve. I'm pointing to the guys under our feet, deserve as much attention as anybody else. What happens with monocultures, Henry? Himalayan Balsam is accused of being a monoculture. I suppose other ones that you could put in there would be things like wheat, or soy, or palm.
Yeah.
What's the problem with that?
So I guess for an ecosystem to function correctly, there needs to be a range of functional species in an environment. And so if you just get one species that dominates, that ecosystem then becomes unstable. You know, within the context of Himalayan balsam, we've talked that, everything just being Himalayan balsam then excludes any species that would then be able to maintain that soil and prevent soil erosion. Yeah. But I guess if you look at agricultural systems, so you talked about wheat. If we have really large monocultures of wheat, season after season after season, we end up with pathogens that naturally come and infest those areas. Yeah. And that is kind of an ecological balance in a way, but obviously we want to eat those, Yes. Sure. And so, we have like a bigger impact on our environment, and then it just starts to degrade. It's kind of negative feedback after negative feedback,
I think Tilly gets upset with soil erosion so much.
I'm getting some sort of
Food production is probably the issue in conservation globally at the moment, besides climate change.
Right, yeah.
What do we need to change in order to improve food production globally and the way we use soil right now?
Yeah, right. I mean, there's a big question there.
How long you got?
So I guess, with a lot of these big issues, there's many ways to skin a cat, right? Yeah. There's kind of the economic side of, do we onshore more production in terms of, we know it meets a certain environmental standard, but maybe then, we're not trading with countries that might actually really need that income.
Sure.
And do we hold them to the same environmental standards that we hold ourselves? When in fact, they might just be trying to increase their standard of living. So that, there's a big economic, philosophical question there.
You and I sit in a very privileged position, having been born in this part of the world.
Exactly.
I mean, food security's never been an issue for me. I hope it hasn't for you.
No, just, normal cravings for snacks.
Yeah, totally. Crisp security is what I'm most keen on preserving. But yeah, I mean, it is seriously an issue, even in a place like the United States,
Yeah.
where agriculture has decimated the soil. Is that correct?
Yeah, of course. Like you get like the Dust Bowls, right, and that kind of led to the Soil Conservation Service. I think it's like Roosevelt, right? It said like a nation that destroys its soils destroys itself. So
Good old Roosevelt. Good for a quote, isn't he? But that is true. I mean, we have to make a mass of food. I realise you're a scientist. You're an academic, but does that worry you? Is it something to be concerned about?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's how you go about it. I think we're more than capable of doing it. I think it's who we cater to in terms of, the economic and the social arguments. I mean, one of the big things that comes up in ecology is this kind of sparing versus sharing debate.
Right.
So, there's one school of thought that says we should share land, right? And this can be in terms of wildlife, this could be in terms of soil conservation, that, the areas that we produce food on, we should do it with a low ecological impact. And so we're sharing land with pollinators or other creatures,
So this is wildflowers alongside your wheat field?
Exactly.
Right.
Other people say, actually, we should spare land, and so we should go as hard as we can in a smaller area. So, very extreme form of that might be like vertical farming,
Sure.
So actually we just take all food production away from the natural environment. We put it in a big warehouse, we put computers, lights, controls, and we've got very high production, but maybe, a larger energy cost.
You would imagine.
Yeah, very high entry for smallholder farmers. Then what do you do about their livelihoods? Do you just say, oh, actually we've built a 12-story vertical farm in the centre of Manchester, we're coming to shut you down, you're going to be a national park?
You can make soil at home. This is correct, right? Composting is making soil. Is that too simplistic, or is that right? No.
I guess that's like a key part of it, right? Like, so you're breaking down that organic matter, and then that's a key component. Things that also go into soil is the structure, so the mineral component. So whether you use sand, silt, clay, that really affects the way that like a soil functions. But
actually, you remind me of one of the key questions here. We're talking about losing soil, but soil can be made and is made too.
Yeah.
What makes up soil? What is soil?
Yeah, so soil has biotic component. So that's all of the life that lives in that soil, bacteria, fungi. You'll get small animals like columella, nematodes, and then your sort of megafauna. Some of them, I guess, are charismatic, right? like your moles.
Yeah, moles. There's a good one. There's some charismatic megafauna.
So you've got your biotic component, and then you've got your abiotic component. So you've got the organic matter, so the leftover residues of things that were once living. You've got the mineral component, so those sands, silts, clays. You've got the air pockets, because where there's oxygen and not oxygen in those environments really changes the way that they function.
Right.
And then the water. And so it's kind of this whole ecosystem.
Yeah.
But
yeah. And we've got police sirens in the background. We're in the middle of the ring road here. Sorry, viewers, there's only so much you can do for noise suppression, but hope you don't mind this low rumble in the background. In terms of those components of soil then, coming back to Himalayan Balsam again and your sort of monoculture thing and the shallow roots too.
Yeah.
What do we know about, or do you know about the effects of what a shallow-rooted monoculture can have? Does it start to erode that diversity in the soil? What happens? Yeah,
so I guess Himalayan Balsam's really competitive. So I guess it's limited by how much carbon it can fix, right? So it's taken a strategy that here has made it really successful, where it basically says, I'm going to be massive above ground and I'm going to outshade everything.
Yeah.
And then below ground, though, I've sacrificed some of that carbon, so there's actually not much there.
Right.
But, that kind of affects what sort of environments that it lives in.
Yeah.
So we often find it in very wet, very nutrient-rich environments, and so the UK can be quite wet.
Really? You're kidding me? I mean, you're not from Manchester, I don't think. Where are you from?
I'm from London originally, yeah.
So why on earth did you come up to Manchester, man?
Oh, Manchester's great.
It's beautiful.
Absolutely love it.
But it is wet.
It is wet.
So yeah, the Himalayan balsam thrives in the wet. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, no, it thrives in the wet, and then it thrives in these really nutrient-rich environments because it doesn't have that root structure to get those resources in. So it's basically found a strategy, and then that gives it the ecological niche. I guess the thing that we're doing, we've got a really bad problem with our water companies at the moment. The amount of effluent that's going into our rivers, I would predict would make our Himalayan balsam problem worse because we're dumping in a lot of nitrogen, a lot of phosphorus, and if then we get these floods, we get these periodic floods, all of that effluent then raises up. And then what are we left with as soon as the water recedes? We've got these very wet, very nutrient-rich environments, and Himalayan balsam goes, thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so it's a bit of a mirror on the way that we're kind of treating the environment,
It truly is. I mean, that's kind of the inspiration for the series, is that you can investigate all these different things just through one species.
Yeah.
And there's a problem with the term invasive. When we say invasive, obviously, we mean something that outcompetes everything and isn't necessarily native to the area.
Yeah.
It didn't invade on its own, of course. British people brought it over. Let's just make that absolutely clear. But it does so well here. Do you know much about the species that it is outcompeting? We can see around, as I can see, ferns and bracken, brambles, some hogweed and things like that.
Yeah.
Are their root structures better for the soil?
Yeah, I think they would be. In terms of the stuff that I've read that's a bit closer to my research, I know that it can have negative impacts on mycorrhizal. There's a bit of, if you read the literature, there's a mixed picture. So these mycorrhizal fungi that live in the soil, they can help plants to establish.
Right.
So for example, aspen trees.
Yep.
Read a really good study where they were saying that because Himalayan balsam is so competitive and it doesn't really have those big rooting structures, that results in the mycorrhizal fungi maybe not being quite as healthy.
Right.
And then when those aspen saplings try and establish, they can't establish because those mycorrhizal networks are a bit dampened. But
got it.
you were saying there about the term like invasive. I actually read another study that compared native expansive type plants. So Himalayan balsam is an expansive type plant. It grows very fast, it'll expand and then it'll die off. That's its kind of life strategy, as opposed to kind of hunkering down like a big oak, just saying like, I'm going to plant here and I'm going to live here for like 150 years.
Yeah.
So it's an expansive type plant. This study, I think it was in the Czech Republic, they found that there actually wasn't really much of a difference when you just start comparing Himalayan balsam to native expansive type plants.
Oh, okay.
In terms of what impact it's having on soil processes.
Fair enough.
So it's a complicated picture, and I think if you really start to deep dive, it's really important to just like read like a lot of studies. Like in making this documentary, is there anything that you've seen that you've heard that's actually like, wow, that's actually really like conflicting?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. We met a beekeeper called Catherine who works for a charity called Volition a few weeks ago. She keeps bees on the roof of Manchester Cathedral. Wow. Which is cool. It's really nice. We went up there, we got our bee suits on, and a couple of years ago, really wet season, a lot of the native flowers just had a very short flowering season or even didn't come up.
Okay.
I like to go blackberry picking and I didn't get anything.
Wow.
The woods around here, it just came and went. But balsam had a really long flowering season and probably fed her bees. So I've done this backwards, Henry. It's really rude of me. I've stormed in asking all about Himalayan balsam, and I should ask you some questions about yourself at some point.
Well, okay. That's nice.
But first, I'm going to talk some more about balsam. There's a bit of interest in, I don't know whether it's pop science or not, but I do read the odd book, and something that came up was the interaction between soil microbes and your hands and your microbiome.
Right, yeah.
I realised maybe that's not necessarily your area of study, but I don't know anything about it. So in the simplest terms, when I'm lifting up balsam, I don't tend to wear gloves, and I don't wear gloves when I'm gardening either.
Right.
What might be happening there between my hands and the soil?
Right. So I guess going back to those sort of different components of soil, we've got the biotic aspect there that you've touched on.
Yeah.
And so, there's microbes that spend part of their life in the soil, and then they get onto our skin. We then eat plants that have of course grown in the soil, so then they end up in our gut. These have really important implications for health. I mean, one of the things, there's a lot of study, so this is the kind of gut microbiome field of research, is things around inflammation. So, I used to be part of a lab at the University of Queensland, a lab run by Associate Professor Paul
Queensland?
Dennis. Yeah, Queensland, Australia.
Oh, wow, nice one. That must have been fun.
It was good. But he found that these microbes that at one point would have been living in soil, and then have made their way into our gut. If we're eating a high fibre diet, the gut microbes that we can keep going lower that inflammation. And he's actually found that he was part of a team that found that was really important for traumatic spinal injuries. So,
interesting.
So, heaven forbid, say you're in a car crash and your spinal cord gets severed. First thing they're going to do is give you lots of antibiotics to prevent any infections, but that has a really negative impact on your gut microbiome, which causes more inflammation, and then that's the main thing that determines whether your spinal cord reattaches.
Blimey.
So, to come back to your question on the soil microbes, I guess interacting with soils, you're likely to increase your diversity, but of course there are pathogens in there as well. We've talked about the tendency for UK water companies to dump effluent in our rivers.
Noted.
And if we're in an area that tends to flood, there might be quite high fecal coliforms, things like E. coli. Personally, I'd recommend washing your hands before you eat.
Sure. But by the same token, proceed with caution. Is definitely it.
Proceed with caution.
Hello, me again. It was funny when that tree branch fell down, wasn't it? We'll be back after this advert.
This programme is brought to you by Genuinely Beneficial Products. This week,
Water.
Genuinely Beneficial Products.
Thanks, Genuinely Beneficial Product. And if you haven't got a water book, go and get one this weekend. Takes about 5 minutes to install. Free water. What's not to love? Anyway, let's go back to the interview where Henry and I are sat in exactly this spot of the woods. Henry, this is usually the first question you ask people, and I'm going to ask you now. What is your job? What do you do?
So, I'm a research associate at the University of Manchester. I study plant microbe interactions. So I'm very interested in how management in agriculture and in natural environments influence plants, and then that in turn influences microbes. And the reason that I care about that is because those processes have really big impacts on plant health. So if we're trying to conserve species or we're trying to produce more food, we need to know about that. And also that those microbes perform a lot of important ecological functions.
Sure.
So,
what is the sort of number one pressing issue in your field of study at the moment?
So I guess it's in terms of climate change. Are these short extreme weather events that we're having, are we starting to become basically ecologically unstable?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the research that we do is framed around that. Some of the work that we've done in the Yorkshire Dales has been looking at, you know, how drought events and the management of those soils might influence their ability to store carbon. But I've also looked at how drought and actually a lack of nitrogen as well might influence some soil processes. And I also, in Australia, I worked on Bananageddon. Perhaps there's time for a series on that.
Bananageddon?
Bananageddon.
You got to tell me what that is.
My wife will be like, you managed to slip bananas in.
This is a specialty of yours, is it, banana?
Yeah, so I did a PhD. So I was very lucky to be part of the Fusarium Wilt response program for the banana industry in Australia. But Bananageddon is, we have one type of banana that we tend to eat. You know, when you go to the supermarket, you know, you'll see many types of apple, you know, many types of pears, tomatoes, so on.
Sure.
You only really see one type of banana.
What is it?
It's Cavendish.
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 Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Now I have heard that.
Yeah.
So what's the problem with that?
So, you know, when you eat a banana, you don't see any banana seeds. So the banana that we eat actually has like a genetic condition. It's a triploid. It has 3 copies of its chromosomes, which make it sterile. And so, yeah, you can't breed bananas particularly easily because the ones that we eat are sterile. The ones that aren't sterile aren't the ones we eat. So there's an issue there. They've got lots of seeds in them. You can Google them. It wouldn't look, it'd be like trying to eat a banana filled with ball bearings.
Nice. Sounds like a challenge.
Yeah, exactly.
But what was Bananageddon?
So yeah, there's a pathogen, Fusarium oxysporum, that can infect the main cultivar of banana that we eat. And so people were worried that basically we won't be able to grow that cultivar anymore, and we don't really have many that are ready to go. But yeah, there used to be another type of banana that one of the first ones that was part of international trade called the Gros Michel.
Okay.
And that went, in all intents and purposes, extinct for production in the 1950s. Yeah, so I guess one of the anecdotal things that we always say is, you know, when you have like banana sweets, they don't really taste like banana. Yeah. That flavour profile was based on the old banana.
Oh, right, okay.
That we don't really eat anymore, but it was an amazing banana. It had more
I love banana sweets.
Yeah.
The little soft foamy ones.
So yeah, if you go to the kind of some parts of South America, you might be able to pick up a Gros Michel and you can have the original banana.
Well, I'm off. I love that flavour. Absolutely love that flavour. That's. I was going to ask you for a conservation fact this week, but that fills that slot quite nicely. It'd be our second conservation fact about bananas too. I'll put a pin in that. How you've studied bananas? Was soil a passion of yours? How does one get into your field of work? How did you do it?
Yeah, so you know, I was brought up on a council estate on the edge of West London. So.
Right, typical soil ecology.
Yeah, you go Heathrow Airport, bananas.
Yeah. Standard.
So yeah, you know, I was very lucky to be able to go to university, studied environmental science at University of West England in Bristol. When I was there, I had a friend that said, oh, actually, I'm off to Brazil. We get a year in industry, and I found this great gig where we can go to Brazil. And I said, oh, that sounds awesome.
Yeah, great.
And so, yeah, I was very lucky to spend 6 months with Iracambi.
Yeah.
So they work in the Mata Atlantica, which is the Atlantic rainforest. It's just above like Rio de Janeiro, so it's in a state called Minas Gerais. Really sort of degraded forest. I think there's about 7% of it left from sort of pre-industrialization. And so, you know, they're working really hard to reforest that area. And so when I was out there, I had this kind of, you know, boots on the ground ecological experience, and, you know, spend a lot of time thinking about deforestation. Yeah. And really what was driving all of that deforestation was, in fact, poor soils. Okay. So, you know, like, why were people cutting it down was because, you know, they wanted to plant cash crops, you know, so they'd cut down, you know, pristine forest, burn it. That would release particularly phosphorus, which limits a lot of plant growth in tropical systems. And then, you know, they would have some crops of sugarcane, coffee, bananas.
You and bananas.
and then they would move on, and that's nothing to those people were just making a livelihood, and that was just the way that I mean. We chopped down all of our forests way before that in the UK.
Yeah, sure.
We were chopping them down in the Bronze Age.
Absolutely.
Nothing to say
no
on
judgment.
how. No judgment on the way that I think Brazil do excellent conservation work. So
sure.
nothing on saying the way that the people manage that land there. But to their testament, they had this really big reforestation project. And they were often operating on much lower budgets than what we would operate on. So they'd really put in a lot of effort to recover from that. And so I came away from that experience saying, actually, a lot of this stuff is driven by soils, and got a love for the natural environment, and so I wanted my contribution to be like, okay, if we understand soil and focus more on microbial processes, can we make sure that people are fed, and then in that kind of sparing sort of what we were talking about, do we share or spare the land? Can we then actually spare some land for just nature? Sure. Perhaps like a rewilding project, or however you want to do it.
So you had a bit of a roundabout way of getting into it then?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. How did you end up in doing ecological documentaries, I guess?
I really appreciate you asking that, 'cause it gives me an opportunity to give thanks to executive producer wife, who was there and is now there. So I didn't do a proper degree, I got a media degree. Waste of time. Anyone can do it. No, I'm only kidding. I did a media degree, but my wife, executive producer wife, she works in conservation for TCV.
Right.
I was, before we sort of got to know each other, I was a complete novice to ecology, conservation, the natural world. I watched David Attenborough, loved all that sort of stuff. I wasn't a climate change denier or anything, but this is going to sound corny. Honestly, it was balsam bashing that really made me pay attention.
Right.
That there was such a thing as an invasive species. And soil erosion.
Yeah.
And that actually all the trees were different species. I didn't even know how to identify trees,
Yeah.
I knew what a silver birch was because we had one in my garden when I was a kid. But apart from that, wouldn't have known anything from anything else.
Right.
Right now, I think the reason that I'm making these films and wanted to is because I honestly don't think there's anything more important in the world. I wonder if your revelation about the soil was similar. I don't know how anyone thinks about anything else, really.
Than the environment we live in, I guess.
Than the environment.
Yeah.
And not just climate change. I think the words climate change get a lot of attention. That's the big, scary term, you either believe in it or you don't believe in it. And it's this huge overarching term, but it's one factor when it comes to soil, isn't it?
Yeah.
Invasives being another, I would suppose.
Yeah, exactly.
Pesticides and chemicals.
Exactly.
A list as long as your arm.
Yeah.
Same effect on insects, same effect on trees and dieback of trees and all sorts of things. So what I'm fascinated by is that this mountain of a task that faces the whole of humanity.
Yeah.
And we're desertifying a planet potentially, and could, in our lifetimes, I'm not going to ask how old you are on camera, not really, but it's going to be our lifetimes now. I'm roughly millennial Gen X.
Yeah.
Zennial, I think, is the awful term for people my age, Zennial. And I think the first people who'll be alive to really see these effects, I think, from what I can understand. So I just honestly, I do worry.
Yeah.
I've said that in every film that we've made so far. I do worry.
Yeah.
But as a response to that,
yeah,
I want to do something. I want to investigate and find out more.
Yeah.
Do you share that thinking? What do you worry?
Yeah, I mean, of course, there's a lot to worry about. I think humans have an amazing capacity to adapt, but I don't think we should take that for granted. And we are. By scientific estimates, we're living through the 6th worst extinction on this planet. 4 billion years old. I'm not quite that old.
We're doing great. You're less than 4 billion. All right, we've got that. That's on the record now.
Less than 4 billion. Spring chicken. I think there's things to worry about, but you do get these good news stories, there's a scientist that that I work with that was quite a senior professor at Manchester. He's just gone, he's actually, him and another professor that I work with, so this is Richard Bargett and David Johnson, they're setting up a soils research centre at Lancaster University, really exciting project.
Cool.
But Richard just released a paper on kind of interventions. So we work a lot in the Yorkshire Dales and looking at grassland conservation.
Cool.
It's a little bit roundabout. I'll get back to what I brought
Please,
up.
go ahead.
But
We've got time, haven't we, guys?
They found that in terms of soil multifunctionality, so you know, the ecological functions of soils, the more interventions that they introduced, the better those soils got. So you know, the first few, obviously you got quite a big impact, and then it does start to teeter off, but it still carries on up.
When you say intervention, you mean like human activity?
Yeah, like a management practice that they've done, and that might be you know, removing grazers, or you know, introducing native species through seed, or you know, basically the more things that they added on, the better those soils got. And so I guess I found that quite a good paper, because I think it can be quite emblematic of the environmental movement in general. You know, because I think you can get so weighed down in like, wow, this thing that we need to do is so massive. You know, I want to do the thing that gets us like 90% of the way there, you know. But in fact, I think if everyone does a little bit, we'll kind of, you know, we're all just building on each other. You know, I'm not a media specialist. I think any film that I made would be absolutely horrific. So I really appreciate your
Give me half an hour,
work.
I'll show you how to stuff. Piece of cake, mate.
I don't have
No, I appreciate that. I do agree. Little actions. Balsam Bashing being one of them. You know, we're in an area here that we cleared. What would you say this is? 10 square feet, 20 square feet?
Exactly, yeah.
Little action. I'm going to check on this next year.
Right, great.
See if you and I sitting here and the bashing that we did, what difference that made. I reckon there's a lovely fern somewhere here. I reckon it'll be quite well established by next year. You're right. The little actions. I really do agree. It's completely overwhelming otherwise, isn't it? And interesting to hear you talk about sort of human intervention and human interaction, or sort of management. I read a book years ago, 1491 it was called, the year before Columbus arrived in the Americas.
Excellent.
So it tries to paint a picture of the Americas just the year before there. To cut a long story short, in the Amazon basin, they've discovered that a lot of the more fertile land was because of human management, and sort of cultured management for generations, hundreds and hundreds of years, and they were able to grow crops that, you know, they otherwise wouldn't have been able to grow for the whole village down there. Again, I'm not an academic, don't know the truth of this or anything. Great book though, really interesting read. But it does seem clear that it's going to take management, it's going to take decision making and action, rather than sitting back and letting nature do its thing to solve these problems. Is that right?
Yeah, again, like another big debate that's come up, you know, like you've got this sparing versus sharing, you know, there's a big rewilding movement. We're actually at Manchester, they're doing one of the first master's courses just in rewilding. And so they're really passionate about making the case for that. It's kind of a lack of management as a form of management, if you know what I mean.
Got it, yeah. I can see the benefit. I mean, you know, nature knows what it's doing.
Exactly, and I guess, you know, the problem can be, I guess, if you have very heavy management to try and achieve some outcomes, you know, I guess as soon as the money dries up or the people move on, you know, then does it like regress? And so, you know, I guess it's trying to get to,
Fife's a fan of lack of management. He's supportive of that.
We want no micromanaging, hey Fife, what do you reckon? So yeah, but I think there's many ways to skin a cat, and I think, you know, it's got to be, you've got to take people with you. You know, you do have to consider sort of the economic impacts of a lot of these, you know, of sustainability. So yeah, and I think it's trying to consider them all together. But I think, you know, there's a lot of good ideas out there, and I think, you know, a lot of stuff that's well-meaning, as long as we don't go too hard, too fast over too big an area.
Got you.
Yeah.
In terms of personal little actions, you know, choices that we make just as individuals? Do you think that's important?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I do eat meat, but I'm trying to reduce the amount that I eat. So I've said to myself, all right, let's just not eat meat for breakfast. So I think I was telling you, had a fry up this morning, and rather than my bangers and bacon, I just had an egg and some mushrooms. That reduces the carbon impact. Vehicle choice. A lot of things that can we cycle a couple of days a week? It's also good for our health. And I think. If we can do these little things, of course, it's not going to work for everyone. It really depends on their life. People have got different health requirements and so on and so forth. But
of course.
I think if we can all do one or two things, that could be planting some flowering species at the bottom of your garden.
Absolutely.
Tearing up the artificial lawn, please.
Oh yes. Now that leads me on. I can't let you leave without asking your conservation sin.
Conservation sins.
Right, my conservation sin.
Everybody has to answer this. Henry, we've talked about your positives. Well done on not having meat for your breakfast this morning. We walked a long way with the kit this morning, so well done to us.
Yeah.
But everybody has to give their conservation sin. I'm going to give you mine first. I don't want to put you on the spot without putting myself on the spot.
Okay.
My conservation sin, it was last week actually. I was in a spot and I bought non-recycled toilet paper. Right. Which just makes me feel terrible because it's toilet paper. You should buy the recycled stuff.
Yeah.
I don't understand anything else. So that's me.
Right.
How about you? Conservation sin?
Oh, I guess it's got to be the single-use plastics that I use, but mainly in the lab. So.
The lab.
In the lab.
All right. Well, tell me more. You got to use single-use plastics.
Yeah,
in the lab,
we
surely.
do. So, we've got an excellent lab manager. So Debbie, if you're listening, she does a really good job. So we are actually we've got like a green certification for our lab practices, but. The problem is a lot of the work that I do is molecular. We're looking at DNA, very minute concentrations of certain compounds, and so we basically need a lot of clean containers quickly, otherwise we can't really do our work.
Totally. And absolutely clean, right?
Yeah. And so, to be honest, the way that we do that most of the time is plastics. But, we will use quite a lot, for maybe doing 24 DNA extractions, that sort of 24 bits of like pea-sized soil, we could end up with a bag of plastic, kind of that sort of size that we're throwing out. But unfortunately, we haven't quite solved that problem yet. So
hey man, I absolve you for this one. Executive producer wife won't mind me revealing that she used to work in the NHS.
Right.
And I've actually done a bit of filming in the NHS hospitals and things like that. Single-use plastics are absolutely necessary.
Right. Yeah.
In your setting, in their setting. And it's a finite resource, plastic, ultimately. And so another excuse for me, for consumers like myself, to stop using single-use plastics is because you lot need them. I want you to have them. You must study this stuff. You need them, and the NHS needs them as well.
Yeah.
So I'm going to absolve you.
Okay, thank you.
You're forgiven. I hope you feel better.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Henry. That was brilliant and genuinely educational. I recommended a book called 1491 by Charles C. Mann. For a book that's about history, it's got a lot of ecology in it, so go and check that one out. The podcast of the week, as you probably heard, is the episode of Stuff You Should Know called Charismatic Megafauna. Brilliant stuff from them, as always. And I'm going to give you a playlist like usual. This one is SMTP Grounded. It's another really good one for your gardening or dog walks or whatever, and all about sort of earthy things like soil. Anyway, that's enough from us. We'll be back next week with a very exciting new guest. Ta-ducks.